biggest mistake people make is they start from the wrong place. They start by saying, here's what I want to say, rather than here's what my audience needs to hear. So it's not about what you want, it's about what they need. And then the second mistake is people just itemize and list everything they want to say. They take the audience on a journey of their discovery of what they want to say as they're saying it. And that becomes overwhelming. So you need to have a structure, a package, a logical connection of ideas. So if we start with audience focus and provide a structure, then we avoid the two big mistakes that people make.
Welcome back to the Dov Baron Show, where we dive deep and get real about what truly shaped today's and tomorrow's leaders. For the next two episodes, we're joined by the unstoppable Matt Abrahams. He is a maestro of spontaneous speaking and the mind behind the transformative book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter: How to Speak Successfully When You're Put on the Spot. Welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. Join the movement of deeply curious leaders by hitting that subscribe button right now. The Dov Baron Show is not just another podcast, it's your passport to unparalleled insights. Each episode features the wisdom of global leaders, scientists, entrepreneurs, entertainers, philosophers, theologians, and journalists. Today, that includes Matt Abrahams. Matt Abrahams is the leading expert in communication and has decades of experience as an educator, author, podcast host, and coach. He lectures on organizational behavior at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business and teaches popular classes in strategic communication and effective virtual presentations. He's a keynote speaker and communications consultant. He has helped countless presenters improve and hone their communication skills, including some who have presented to the Nobel Prize Group, TED, and the World Economic Forum. His online talks garner millions of views. So turn up the volume and help me to welcome author of Think Faster, Talk Smarter: How to Speak Successfully When You're Put on the Spot, and the voice behind the award-winning podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart, Matt Abrahams. Woohoo! We're finally here, Matt.
Dov, it is awesome to be talking with you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, mate. Now, you and I know, because we've had a couple of conversations before, there's this sort of idea that we don't think about people as they evolve and who you were before to get to who you are. You didn't pop out of the womb as a Stanford educator, hopefully for your mother's sake. So give us a little bit of background. Give us the context, the emotional source code of how you came to be this guy. I always think that there was these catalytic moments for people's lives that often take place in their formative years. What got you there?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share this. First and foremost, I am the son of a lawyer and a teacher. So the communication was really important in my house. My mother was always thinking about creative ways to get ideas across. And my dad was always thinking about how do we structure information to be very logical and factual. So I was absorbing all of that. But you're right, there was a very formative moment in my early high school days. I was a freshman, and I was assigned by my English teacher to go present at a speech tournament on an early Saturday morning. I was 14 years old. I show up, not really sure what I'm supposed to do. I prepared a speech on martial arts. I enter this big room. There is the girl I like, my friends, some of the parents of my friends who are judging this thing. They didn't want to be there. I was so nervous. When I started my speech, I knew one thing. I was supposed to get their attention. So I did a karate kick. But I was so nervous, I forgot to put on my special karate pants, the ones that have a little extra room in their crotch. I ripped my pants from zipper to belt loop in the first 10 seconds of a 10-minute speech. I have to say, at that moment, I learned the impact of anxiety on communication. And ever since then, I've been fascinated by it. I've studied it. I've published in it. I've written about it. My whole fascination, I think, goes back to that moment.
That is a pretty profound moment. I think that might be embarrassing for a grown man. For a 14-year-old boy with the girly fancies in the audience.
Yeah.
Like, did you continue?
Yeah, I didn't know what to do. So I kept going. The teacher who was responsible for us was in the room too. She threw me her sweater. It was a bright pink sweater. I tied it around my waist and I just kept going. I actually did very well that round. And I think it's because mostly the parents just had total empathy and sympathy for me. I saw that working through a very challenging situation can have a positive result. But yeah, I just kept going mostly because I didn't know what else to do.
But In many ways, in the context of speaking, I've been a speaker for 40 years now. I used to say that people would flub and they'd say, can I start again? And I go, no.
Yeah.
Because that's not how it works on stage. You've got to find a way to find something to catch up on. Well, I went blank. Then say I went blank and ask the audience, like, where was I? I'm having neurological flatulence, which is a brain fart. Because it happens. What a beautiful and powerful and intense experience of that you definitely had in that moment. When you think about that, and you said in many ways caused a fascination for communication, and you said that you think you did well, and you think that that was the empathy of the people watching. I know that now you are a master of communication and you teach others to communicate. In many ways, the quality of our lives is determined by the quality of the communication we can deliver, whether that's from a platform, a stage, on Zoom, or whether it's dealing with our own children or our own partners in life. I think one of the great mistakes that I certainly had to learn myself is that it seems like most people think they are a good communicator, at least in certain situations. Tell me how you confront that, because you're dealing with people who are probably like the people I'm dealing with, who are very astute. They're esteemed in some way, shape, or form, and they maybe do think that they're a good communicator. How do we confront that within ourselves?
Well, so I think fundamentally it really boils down to what is the goal of communication, which is to, in some way, shape, or form, impact another person. The origin of the word communication is to make comment. So it's about connection. It's about making impact. And even though we might feel like, hey, I'm really articulate and I am really good at formulating thoughts, it boils down to, are you able to connect, make an impact on somebody? So I often find myself, when I'm trying to coach people who are either very sure of themselves or have vast, deep experience, I'm really trying to help them understand that it's all about the value they bring and the impact they have. And getting people outside of themselves seems to help people understand that they really need to focus on honing and developing their skills.
So let's talk about that, because that's a vastly important piece. The stepping outside of yourself. Now, again, we're talking about self-awareness. And in many ways, I think that we live in a society that is polarized internally, meaning there are people who are really dedicated to self-awareness, and most people are not. Most people are vastly lacking in self-awareness. So talk to us about the strategies, or some of the strategies you use to give that person that self-awareness to step outside of themselves, to consider the value that they might bring.
So I do three things primarily, and you're exactly right. Many of us don't focus outside of ourselves. So first and foremost, I have people reflect. I have them think about who are the communicators that have been most impactful in their lives, who are the people they respect in terms of their communication. And often in that reflection, they realize that those are the people who really connect and are other focused. So there's a reflection that leads to a realization. The other thing I do is I have people record themselves, or I actively record them and make them watch how others see them. We are not the best judges of our communication. So to see it, to hear it, can give us a different perspective. And then finally, I ask people to try it. I ask them to say, how would this change your message if you were to be other focused, if you were really trying to have somebody really know something in their bodies or feel something through what you're saying? And it is through those three paths that self-awareness can be developed, especially when people see value and change in their audience and in themselves as a result of adopting this. It becomes a virtuous cycle.
And on the other side of that is this self-doubt. So oftentimes, I know I have friends who are very established speakers, and it's not unusual for a great speaker to think that they're okay, or maybe not so great, or that that presentation wasn't so great, whereas somebody in the audience might think it was wonderful. How do we get people to have that awareness around that even though they've got the self-doubt, and even though the people on the outside are giving them the applause and even coming up and saying thank you afterwards, how do you get past the plexiglass to let that in, to stop it bouncing off the shield?
To help reduce the self-doubt, you mean? Yeah. So we have to think about, what does success mean and look like for us, and allow ourselves to receive that feedback and then assess against our success. Many people, and I say this half jokingly, but when I ask, how do you know if you were successful in your communication? People will say to me, I got through it, as if just survival is the measure. which obviously is ludicrous.
Basically, speaking is like being aboard the Titanic after you hit the iceberg.
Yeah, right.
You were successful because you've gone home.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to say to yourself, what does success look like? And if success is impacting somebody, having them think different, feel different, maybe act differently, then you can feel good about that. I spend a lot of time with my students and the people I coach talking about reflection. We don't take the time to reflect on our communication. So we end up suffering from that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So if you have a clear goal, which helps you define what success looks like, and you do some reflection afterwards, then you can actually grow and change and give yourself permission to celebrate the successes and be motivated to change in those areas where you weren't as successful. But like anything, it's a process. There are only 3 ways to get better at communication, and you need to do all 3: repetition, reflection, and feedback. You got to practice, you got to reflect on what worked and what didn't, and you got to get feedback from others who can help you see outside of yourself. So I guess there's a 4th step, which is to accept the results of that and say, hey, I did a good job, and maybe I don't need to doubt myself so much the next time. Or maybe I didn't do as well as I wanted, and I need to do a little extra work.
Now, of course, you and I in the same generational bracket.
I think you just said I'm old.
No.
Okay.
I said I'm old.
Oh, I see. But I'm in your bracket. I see. Yes.
Yeah, you're in the younger bracket.
I see. Okay.
And so our value systems, they change with generations. It's not about us or them. It's just the way it is. Having said that, what do you see as the cost of living in a society where people are, as you say, being rewarded for superficial identities that they cling to? Because that certainly impacts the quality of their communication.
Yeah. So communication, again, I keep saying connection, but I really do believe it boils down to that, is what allows somebody to be successful is they move us in some way. A successful communicator moves you in some way. That can be emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, some amalgam of all of that. But that is deeper than making you laugh or inciting you to feel excited or sad or happy, like we see on social media. It is a deeper connection. And many of us, especially younger folks, aren't used to connecting in that way, or at least initially. And so part of what I do in the work I do, in the classes I teach, the people I coach, is first help people understand themselves so they can bring their full self to their communication, and then be open to hearing and connecting with others who hopefully are open in the same way. So communication is the way we do relationships. Communication is operationalized relating. It's the operation of that. And so we need to really be present and open for it to happen well.
Okay, we've boiled it down to communication is connection. And at the same time, the realization that connection is different between generations, certainly between, even if we use a simple marker as a generation that was pre-social media and a generation that is social media plus. And so when you're coaching or working with your students, I'm sure that your coaching is probably with a different generation than your teaching is. Is that correct, or am I incorrect?
It's a mix. It's a mix. I coach some younger folks and I teach some older folks. So yes, it's a mix.
So do you find that there's a difference there in that understanding of how they're coming at it? I understand how you're teaching it, but how they're fronting up from this place of what it means to communicate.
There is a lot of awareness building and work I have to do. A lot of people are just very self-focused. And part of what I have to do is help people be other-focused. Communication is about being audience-centric, being in service of the audience. So everybody I work with, I spend time really focusing on that, shifting the spotlight from ourselves to the other.
So in a social media dominant world, even for my generation, we still have to put things out into that social media milieu. And we have to deliver that in ways that were different. I mean, I can remember when I started speaking, if you wanted to see me speak, you likely got on a plane or I got on a plane in order to do that. And a little bit later, you could buy cassette tapes from me, right? Prior to that, I was listening to Dennis Waitley and Zig Ziglar on LP.
Yes.
That's how old I am. Yes, folks. But, you could buy my cassette tapes, and that was the only other way. At the same time, there was a delivery methodology. If I'm going to fly somewhere, I'm going to speak for at least an hour. And if you're going to fly in, you want to hear me speak for at least an hour. And if you're buying my cassette, you want an hour. Now that delivery time is 30 to 90 seconds.
Yes.
And I think in many ways, I was very frustrated with social media, and I've started watching Instagram, and I'm like quite fascinated by the communication skills of some of these creators who, for me, are profoundly good. They deliver this outstanding, engaging communication in 60 to 90 seconds. When you look at that, what do you see? I'm really fascinated, Matthew, from your point of view. It's like, I want to know what you're thinking of this.
I, too, am amazed at how people can accomplish so much in so little time. It's all about being concise and accessible and engaging. And I have seen many folks use social media in a very successful way to accomplish those three. I also see a lot of crap in a lot of things that are upsetting, distracting, etc.
I also see a lot of crap on stage for an hour.
Yeah, exactly.
In fairness.
Right. As the attention economy has developed, we have needed to become more concise, more engaging, more relevant. And there are people who do it very well. But it all fundamentally comes down to the same thing. You've got to understand your audience. You have to tailor your message to what will resonate with them. And then you have to do so in an engaging, accessible, concise way. And that's what they're doing. They're just doing it in a much shorter, tighter time frame than you were doing on the stage and recording your cassettes, which, by the way, I have a large cassette collection as well. And my wife keeps trying to get me to get rid of it, but I'm holding on to it.
So the title of the book is Think Faster, Talk Smarter, and it's really about being on the spot. Now, you and I both know that a lot of speakers out there, some of whom are my very good friends, literally do not step on a stage without being so well rehearsed.
Yes,
they know every 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 pause, every giggle. I'm not that speaker, so please understand that.
Nor am I.
I can't do that. But I admire the heck out of them that they could do it, that they know every tone, everything. I've always said that if you throw me into a crowd and say, give me 5 minutes, I can do a powerful job. If you give me an hour and you give me 3 weeks, I'll just have 3 weeks of anxiety. So it's different for me than it is for most. So talk to us about that side of it, because that's obviously in this book, that's what you're focused on, is giving people this strategy, this way of understanding of being when it comes to you just got thrown this hook from the left, where do you go? Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so that's a big question because there's a lot I could say. So I want to start at the beginning, which is, if you think about it, most of our communication is the type you're describing. It's spontaneous. It's not the planned presentation, the pitch you practiced, or the meeting with agenda. It's the person asking you a question, asking you for feedback. You make a mistake and you have to fix it. You're involved in small talk. Most of our communication is spontaneous. So first, we have to recognize that this is a big deal, and most people don't get any training on it ever. Second, we have to realize that we can all get better at it. Some people feel like I'm just born with the gift of gab or not, and that's not true. We can all develop it, certainly. And then the thing that is most counterintuitive is you actually have to prepare to be spontaneous. And we have to do that by focusing both on our mindset, how we approach it, but also how we actually package up our messages. And the book is really divided into those two parts, mindset and messaging. And then the whole latter part of the book is specific situations and advice and guidance on how to handle making an apology in the moment, making small talk, etc. So at the highest level, it's about how you approach and the way you structure your messages. But the barriers we get in our own way. I mean, part of what we were talking about earlier is a big mindset shift, is we want to do our communication right. We want to be the best version of ourselves when we communicate. The irony is, in doing that, we actually make it less likely that we'll do well. You only have a limited amount of cognitive bandwidth. And if I am constantly judging and evaluating and comparing myself to some perfect standard, which, by the way, does not exist, I have less bandwidth to focus on being focused. So on the very first day of my classes, I tell my Stanford MBA students to maximize their mediocrity. And you should see their jaws drop, because these students have never been told to be mediocre. But the logic is, if you just strive to get it done, get your communication done, you free up all these resources that you might have been allocating to judging and evaluating to actually focus on what's important, which is the communication in the moment. So part of it is mindset. We also have to acknowledge anxiety looms large, and we have to address anxiety, and I spend time talking about that. A lot of my career is focused on that. And then finally, we get to the messaging with how do we make our message focused and concise, and it boils down to structure and relevance. So that's the totality of what one needs to do. If I've done my job right in the book and the way I teach, I've created digestible steps that people can follow to help them get there.
There's a lot to unpack in there.
Yes, exactly.
So we want to unpack more of that when we get into part 2 of the show.
Yes.
Just as we're sort of coming towards the end of this part of the show, what do you think is the biggest mistake people make when it comes to presenting?
Well, we've talked a lot about it. The biggest mistake people make is they start from the wrong place. They start by saying, here's what I want to say, rather than here's what my audience needs to hear. So it's not about what you want, it's about what they need. And then the second mistake is people just itemize and list everything they want to say. They take the audience on a journey of their discovery of what they want to say as they're saying it. And that becomes overwhelming. So you need to have a structure, a package, a logical connection of ideas. So if we start with audience focus and provide a structure, then we avoid the 2 big mistakes that people make.
But for many people, it's often, even when they try to move into that other place, in the place of the audience, they have too many ideas, too many things that they really believe, genuinely believe that the audience do value and do need. So, there's a great saying, I'm sure you're familiar with it, which is you have to learn to kill babies, which is to edit your most beautiful thing out. How do you help them with that? Because I'm sure there are people listening to us right now who are saying, I've got this TEDx potential of doing this event, and I want to talk about this, but I've got 56 things that are really important, and I've boiled it down to 14, but I've got to get it down to 3.
Right. So my mother has a wonderful saying I try to lead my life by, and your listeners can tell if I'm doing a good job of it or not, but it's tell the time, don't build the clock. Many of us are clock builders when we speak. And what we need to do is we really need to say, what is the most critical, valuable information I have for this audience? So we have to start by understanding what the audience needs, knows, and will be impacted by. So we start there. Then what's the most critical thing I can say? That helps you focus. And then have a clear goal. A goal to me has 3 parts: information, emotion, and action. What do I want them to know? How do I want them to feel? And what do I want them to do? By understanding what's important to your audience, having a clear goal, know, feel, do, you then have a mechanism by which to assess what do I say and what don't I say? Because if it's not directly impactful for the audience, it doesn't help with what I want them to know, feel, and do, I leave it out. So we have to set those boundaries, and we have to be very dogmatic in enforcing those boundaries. And that's how you get more concise.
Can you share a specific story of somebody you've helped with that and how that worked through?
Yes. I worked with an individual who received a very, very prestigious award. Very few people get these awards. He's an academic. He studies very deep technical ideas in the field of economics. And he kept feeling like he needs to share everything for people to understand the complexity of these issues. Through a series of interrogations, essentially, where I asked questions saying, what does the audience need? What's the foundational principles? We were able to distill it down, and he was able to deliver a very moving and impactful communication that was accessible and concise and clear. So it's really about holding yourself accountable to the needs of the audience. And in this case, it was through my asking him questions that got him to deliver a great presentation.
Was that a subject matter you were familiar with?
No. I learned a lot. But that's part of what I love about what I do is I get to work with people who are brilliant in all these ways, and I get to learn a little bit. And I love learning. I think every teacher really has a foundational love of learning, and I do.
Yeah, I would agree with that fully. But the reason I asked you that question was because I think that there's such a great advantage to being the curious novice.
Yes.
In that it's like, yeah, I don't know what that means. I have no understanding of that. And I know you're telling me everyone in the audience understands that, but just pretend that they're like me and they don't. So helpful.
Yes.
That's such a good strategy, Matt.
Yeah, and I channel that person. I mean, I try to channel the audience member who is interested but not that knowledgeable. And that's where I think I can add value.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Again, I want to come back to where we were before which is the unpacking of the whole thing in a moment. Before we go to the end of part one, I want to make sure that people know where they can find out more about you and all of your wonderful resources, and of course, your book and your podcast. So please tell people where they can find out more about you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation so far. So to find information about me, very simple, mattabrahams.com, all of my resources, the opportunities for coaching, etc. The podcast is called Think Fast, Talk Smart. If you go to fastersmarter.io, you'll see everything you need to know about the podcast. And I invite people to take the time to work on their communication skills. And I hope I provide resources through the writing I do, the coaching I do, and the podcast to help people feel better and do better in their communication.
Beautiful. And we'll, of course, make sure that all of those links are posted in the show notes so you'll be able to get access to them. So if you didn't catch them as you were listening, don't worry, they're in the show notes. We're going to be back for part two of our delicious conversation with Matt Abrahams in just one click. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you're communicating. Are you communicating about what it is you want to deliver? Or are you communicating about what they need to hear, what they need to move them? We'll be back in just one click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.